On January 6, 1999, just a few days into the new year, a tugboat named the Elk was coasting on the Vistula River when they noticed something out of place floating in the water. Attempting to drive past it, the unknown debris were swept under the tugboat and became lodged in the propeller. When the crew made their way to the latch to remove whatever was causing the jam, they were immediately met with both a very foul smell, and that was quickly followed by the sight of something straight out of a horror movie. What was quickly pulled out of the propeller was long and somewhat stretchy. Thinking that these were the remains of some type of animal, any notion of that being the case was immediately thrown out when what they pulled out of the propeller was something with a human ear attached to it. Disgusted and frightened, the crew of the Elk alerted the captain, and as the entire crew began taking in what they were looking at, they were able to tell that it appeared to be the remains of a human. But instead of seeing any blood or bones, all that seemed to be there was simply skin. Yet, it wasn't natural looking and appeared to have been actually sewn back together. What the crew of the Elk were looking at was a literal skin suit. The crew of the Elk alerted police, and an investigation quickly followed, as this was something that many couldn't wrap their heads around. Nobody thought that a person, or whoever was responsible for this, could actually live among the public, and many hoped that the nature of the skin was due to some type of decomposition. Yet, as much as nobody wanted to face the facts that this was indeed a human skin suit, there was little that could be offered as any other means of an explanation. A few days later, on January 14, 1999, a right leg and several pieces of clothing were found washed up on the shore of the same river where the crew of the Elk made their haunting discovery. When police examined those remains as well as what was discovered on the tugboat, they were able to determine that they belonged to the same person and that the victim was female. What was unknown at the time was the identity of who met with this horrible fate. Shortly after the investigation began, the Polish authorities called in investigators and other experts, as well as consulted with the FBI to aid in both identifying the victim, but as well as establish some type of profile for whoever could be responsible. Within a few weeks of the discovery of the remains, it was learned through DNA testing that the skin belonged to Katarzyna. The country of Poland was shocked to learn that such a young woman could have met with such a brutal end, and the pressure that was on law enforcement to catch whoever was responsible was mounting more and more by the day. In the following months, little progress had actually been made with the investigation, but the FBI was able to give a profile of the attacker. It was stated from them that the killer was male, who was a sadist, enjoyed harassing women, and that he was likely to have a criminal record. And judging by the wounds on the remains, that he more than likely knew some sort of self-defense, and that he could have used this knowledge to incapacitate Katarzyna. Judging from the wounds that could be seen, it was determined that Katarzyna was first beaten and then stabbed in the neck, armpits, and groin. Her official cause of death was ruled as blood loss, but before she had bled out, it was also ruled that she had her organs removed while she was still alive. From the shock of this, it was assumed that she passed out and shortly after succumbed to the blood loss. And after she died, her skin was then flayed, and then her skin was then re-sewn to make the suit that was later found by the tugboat. And as truly horrific as that is to hear, a few months later, a similar crime was reported to police. and many began to fear that they were dealing with someone who wasn't going to stop. In May of 1999, the Forensic Medical Unit in Krakow received the remains of a man with a severed and scalped head. It was quickly determined that the son of the victim was responsible, a man by the name of Vladimir. Investigators had enough to charge him in the death of his father, but naturally, given how something incredibly similar happened to Katarzyna, he was made a suspect given that he actually wore his father's face as a mask. As disturbing as that is to imagine, it unfortunately actually happened. When police looked into Vladimir, they were surprised to learn that he claimed no responsibility for what happened to Katarzyna, and that what he did to his father was from deep-seated anger at him throughout his life, and that he meant for the crime to be a work of art, showing how cruel humans can be to one another with no worry of remorse. He even told authorities that he wore his father's mask and pretended to be him. And as shocked as police were to learn this, they were unable to make any solid connections with Vladimir to Katarzyna. Vladimir was arrested for the crimes against his father and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. But as for the case of Katarzyna, it continued to remain in limbo for years following. Police found no other skin suits in the area and were growing more concerned every year that whoever was responsible had gotten away with a crime that many think is too evil for a person to come up with in their own mind. As the case continued to stall and the years grew longer since the crime, advancements in both law enforcement and forensics helped to start to paint an even brighter picture on the mystery surrounding this case. One of the biggest being that whoever did this clearly didn't stop just at Katarzyna. Police looked into current inmates to see if they matched the criteria that the FBI profile gave them, and as the years had passed, that criteria became even more detailed, such as whoever committed the crime was a person who was skilled with a knife, and even more so, knew how to precisely flay something, claiming that the attacker was a skilled hunter or, at the very least, a butcher. In 2016, the theory that the attacker was skilled in self-defense was still in circulation with authorities, and that he was incredibly knowledgeable in an undisclosed form of martial arts. The police went even further and stated that they could prove Katarzyna had been brutally tortured before her death, and that she could have been kept alive for several days during this time. I have seen conflicting reports that state that she could have been kept alive for 3 to 4 days after her disappearance, all the way to a full month. For the next year, the case continued in a state of no arrest, but those assigned to it worked day after day to secure any lead that they could come across. That seemed to finally pay off when on October 4th, 2017, police made an arrest after 19 years since the crime originally happened. Police arrested Robert Jonchevsky. The arrest came after years of having him on police radar. It was said that he had been an unnamed suspect since 1999, and after investigators searched his apartment, they were able to find blood in both his bathroom and on his bed frame. If that blood belonged to Katarzyna, Robert, or someone else entirely is unknown, as police are keeping a lot of information private since the investigation is still ongoing. What is known is that Robert fits the profile made by the FBI pretty well. Robert was a trained martial artist. He knew Katarzyna. He was frequently seen visiting her grave throughout the years. He had a history of both harassment and assault against women, and he was known to have a short temper. What is even more eye-catching is that in the past, he had actually worked at a dissecting lab where he handled human remains. In addition to this, he also worked at a zoology institute, and while he was employed there, he was responsible for skinning various animals and preparing them. He actually worked there for several years, but was fired due to him killing all of the institute's rabbits in what was said to be a fit of rage, which has been something that Robert himself has been unable to explain, as he claims that he was so angry that he couldn't recall anything. The fact that Robert matches a lot of the profile is eye-catching, but it still wouldn't be enough to charge someone with a crime. The reason Robert was arrested was due to Robert's friend giving the police a letter that Robert had written him a few weeks prior that contained information about the case that wasn't made aware to the public. From what I read about the letter, according to police, the information in that letter has been a closely guarded secret since the start of the investigation, and it would be something only someone who either played a part in the crime or was directly involved would know. Because of this, Robert Jagiellonian has been charged with the murder of Katarzyna Zowada and is still being held in custody as more evidence is gathered. Robert himself states that he is innocent and has accused everything being a complete lie and saying that the police are simply trying to pin this on someone. He also claims that the letter doesn't even exist and that it was made up by the police to get a warrant to arrest him.